verse 45 to 46, and then the parable of the net in verses 47 to 50. Then, finally, there's a summary statement in verses 51 and 52, and that's important. So let's take a moment and read these, 13, 51, 52. Have you understood all these things, they said to him? Yes. And Jesus said to them, therefore, every scribe who has become a disciple of the kingdom of heaven is like a head of a household who brings out of his treasure things new and old. So Jesus asks if they understand the parables. And they say that, yeah, they do. He responds yet with another parable. This time he compares them to the head of a household whose job it is to provide for the needs of the household. In other words, they are to feed and care for. Okay? In explaining the parable, Jesus says that they're providers of the household, which essentially is the kingdom, and will supply what they've been given and taught, as well as what they'll see and experience during their training in this kingdom. They'll possess some old truth, such as things that are known and accepted in their law and in the Old Testament prophets' messages, but they'll also have some new truth that they've learned through Jesus and his parables. For instance, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And then, of course, they'll learn about the power of the Holy Spirit. And when they've learned and understood what he's taught them, they'll be able to see how both the material and the spiritual are truly connected, and then be able to feed and establish the kingdom accordingly. Okay, let's check out some overall questions for us to consider about these teachings from our King so far. Number one, what actually are parables, and how did Jesus use them? Who knows what they are? What's a parable? A story. And what's the purpose of the story? Teach us a lesson, right? Okay. They're stories that show hidden meanings sometimes and shows us things to understand as far as the kingdom and the church that's being established.
They're typical stories that the people that they understand the circumstances.
Very good point. He mentioned that they're typically stories that people can relate to, and that certainly helps. It's also an effective way of teaching if you can tell a story that people can relate to. So how can we gain accurate meaning from parables? Okay, we got parables. How can we gain an accurate meaning from them? How do we know that they're okay?
Apply them to our lives.
Boom, you got it. Apply them to our lives. And we can also study them like we're doing now. We can sit down and figure, okay, what does this mean? And then we can compare them a lot of times to actual history. And I'm not talking about Bible history, but actual history. Jesus gave a parable saying such and such was going to happen, and we can look in any history book and we can see that that actually happened. Okay? Then number three, how can we use these lessons to grow spiritually and help us, and actually help others come into a relationship with Jesus? How can we use these parables to help us? It's relatable.
Just like it was, in their language and something they understood.
Yep. So if we know a story from a parable, what does that help us do? If we know the story from a parable and we say, whoa, that's right. that can help us understand something that we might use. In other words, we can pass that on, can't we? Because you get a good deal of knowledge from it, and you can simply pass that on.
Well, you can use it to maybe change the circumstances to where it could apply to us today. Because how many farmers are, moving away, so you have to change it to what is going on today.
He mentioned that you have to change it to keep up with what's going on today, and that's a fact. Everybody understand that's how important that is, because things change constantly. Yes, sir.
Also to make sure you apply it to yourself.
Oh, so it's important to apply it to yourself other than just teach them? Good point. If we do apply it to ourselves and we're the kind of person that we need to be, what do you got? An effective preacher, okay? But if we use these lessons as guidelines, we're doing a real good job as far as what we're supposed to be doing, which is to go into the world and preach the gospel. Everybody agree? Okay, now, on to chapters 14 and 15 that we're going to be calling the kingdom kindness. We're studying the royal person of Jesus as he's described by Matthew in his gospel. Matthew presents us with an image of Jesus as the king of the kingdom that ends up being installed on earth. And in his gospel, we see, Matthew's gospel, Jesus worshipped by the wise, Jesus being the Lord, even for both good and bad spirits, Jesus explaining his kingdom, Jesus establishing his kingdom, Jesus preparing kingdom workers, and Jesus helping the kingdom grow. Wow. So Jesus, by being here and using parables to teach us, has done a bunch of good things for us. Do you agree? Okay. I think it's fantastic that every time we turn to a new scene in Matthew's eyes, he shows us another aspect of Jesus' royal nature and work. And knowing Jesus, y'all, is what Christians really need in our short lives here on this earth. So, in these two chapters, 14 and 15, we'll see some of the many acts of kindness Jesus performed on behalf of the people. Usually a king is the recipient of service, right? Not the one doing the serving. A regular king has gobs of servants, and their task is to find out what he wants and then provide it for him. Matthew shows us how different the kingdom of heaven is. Then it's essentially backwards. Jesus is the one who serves, and it's he who fills the needs of his subject. He's the king, and he even washes people's feet. Do you think the King of England would do that now? If you had a dirty foot and you asked King Charles to... Pope does once a year. Now, Matthew here describes 7 instances of the king's kindness towards others. First, let's check out, number 1, feeding the 5,000 in chapter 14, verses 13 to 21. Bear with me when I read it, because it's a good story. Now, when Jesus heard about John, he withdrew from there in a boat to a secluded place by himself. And when the people heard of this, they followed him on foot from the cities. When he went ashore, he saw a large crowd and felt compassion for them and healed the sick. Whenever it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This place is desolate and the hour is already late. So send the crowds away that they may go into villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Ordering the people to sit down on the grass, he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up towards heaven, he blessed the food, and breaking the loaves, he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. They picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 full baskets. There were about 5,000 men who ate, besides women and children. Now, Matthew gives some details about John the Baptist's execution before he describes the scene where Jesus was with this multitude. He could have been maybe trying to convey the idea that after John's death, many of his followers began to follow Jesus, and this could explain the surge in this number of people seeking out the Lord for comfort and teaching. In this scene, Matthew notes that Jesus' reaction to John's death is to retreat to a remote spot, probably to mourn and pray over the death of his cousin and forerunner. Matthew says that the people received word of where he was and followed him. Okay, here's a question. What about today? Can this method Jesus used to help him cope with John's death, can it work for us when we've lost a loved one? I think it can. In my experience and opinion, the answer to that is yes. One of the things I like to do is go by myself up on Mount Nebo, find a secluded place and sit and think about my ex-wife and pray. And that you'll be surprised how that helps. When Jesus returns from his retreat, he finds more than 5,000 people waiting for him. Matthew says that Jesus had compassion on them because they were hungry, tired, and without direction or hope. So he not only cared for their spiritual well-being, but also understood their basic needs for food and rest. Now, his disciples suggest they just send the people away to care for their own needs. Jesus responds that they, the disciples, care for them. And they answer, "We only have 5 loaves and 2 fish." Jesus takes and multiplies these in a way that they all eat sufficiently. And then, like it says, once distributed, the apostles discover that there's actually 12 baskets of bread left over. So the point here, y'all, was not just performing the miracle to impress the crowd. Jesus used his power to provide an act of kindness towards those people. He showed the disciples that he was a source that provided for their needs as well, even if their need was to feed more than 5,000 people. Jesus does a miracle as an act of kindness towards the multitude and as an example of his power to build the faith of his disciples. Do y'all think that there's a good message here for us as a church? Think about that a second. Is there a good message for us as a church? Yes, sir.
I think no matter how small or how meager we do things, like Christ did. I mean, we can't do miracles, I realize that. But I think Christ can take that and multiply it just like he did the fishes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very good point. Yes, sir.
This miracle has to be very important because it's in all 4 of the Gospels. And it's the only miracle that is in all 4 Gospels.
It's in all four, yeah. Super important.
Well, it showed God's power, but it also, the message to the disciples was, do something.
Do something, right.
Don't just sit around and wait for God to take care of it.
Yeah.
They had a part.
And as a church, it also tells us that it's good to feed the needy, both spiritually and physically. Okay? It's really good for us to do everything we can to help those that we can help. And that's one of the amazing things about Jesus.
He didn't just feed them a snack, they were all satisfied.
They were all satisfied.
It showed that he can do more than the bare minimum. He can
Exactly.
do it all,
He could do it all.
take care of
Yeah. Double burger with bacon. They were full.
Have it your way.
Have it your way. Good point. Thank you. Now on to number 2, strengthening the faith of his disciples, where Matthew 14, verse 22 to 23 tells us, immediately he made the disciples get into a boat and go ahead of him to the other side, while he sent the crowds away. After he'd sent the crowds away, he went up onto the mountains by himself to pray. And when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. And the fourth watch of the night, and in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became frightened and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand, took hold of him, and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind stopped. And those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "You are certainly God's Son." Now note, at this time, Jesus remained with the people and sent the apostles ahead on a boat to cross back over the lake. He also retreated to continue his time of prayer. Then Matthew says the boat was caught up in a storm, and at a critical moment Jesus appeared to the frightened apostles while walking on the water. Again, we have here a situation where a miracle demonstrates his lordship over the material world and the physical laws of the material world. Okay? Amazing. Back in the miracle of the loaves and fish, the disciples were strangely silent because they were entering a space where their sense of reality was being tested. Once in the boat, however, they were once again on familiar terrain. What were they, after all? Fishermen. They knew everything about boats and fish and nets and sails.
You notice, Mike, they didn't question Jesus about how he was going to go to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
They just got in the boat and left.
They just got in the boat and left. Yeah.
And that's what we need to do, is not question Jesus about how this can be done. Just get to work and do it.
Get to work and do it. We don't have to get in our boat and leave. That's right.
We might have to get in our car and drive somewhere else.
Yeah, that's true. Because even if we had a boat, we may not have the right sails, right? I guess they were using sails back then, weren't they, Ronnie?
Yes, sir.
Okay, no. Ronnie knows all about that. Now, they weren't really afraid of storms since these were a regular occurrence in the type of work they did. However, when Jesus appeared to them, they were afraid to the point of crying out. The Lord comforted them with assurances that he was not a ghost, nor was this a nightmare or a vision. Peter amazes me, because at this point, he decides to test what he sees and asks Jesus to let him walk on the water too. For a time then, his faith is solid and he succeeds. Does pretty good when he first starts walking on the water. Then he realizes that this isn't a dream. The wind is real. The danger is real. So the apostle begins to doubt, and that hesitation causes him to sink. Peter's faith wasn't strong enough to permit him to continue walking on the water. But by this point, it's strong enough to ask Jesus for help, which is good, because the Lord provided it. Note that when Jesus and Peter return to the boat, the storm stops, and the apostles' collective faith is strengthened to the point where they probably no longer see him as a human teacher or prophet, but worship him as the Son of God. They had to know at this point, this is the real Messiah. So what do you think the basic lesson is here for this parable?
Keep your focus.
Keep focus. Very good.
To know when to ask for help.
To know when to ask for help. And also to have the faith to know that God will do what when you ask for help? God is going to help you. Do you think that when God is going to help you and you have faith that that's going to happen, do you think it's going to happen as quick as you want? Maybe not. Not necessarily. But you do get help.
Never doubt.
Yeah.
When you doubt, you sink.
When you doubt, you sink. Very good.
Sometimes he answers immediately.
Sometimes he does answer immediately. Absolutely. We just have to remember that we have to have enough faith to absolutely trust the Lord. You know, if you remember, and when I say trust the Lord, that's without doing like a lot of us do, sitting here and figuring out all the bad things that's probably going to happen first. You're thinking, okay, I got this happening, so there's going to be more things happening even though I pray. And we got to be faithful, faithful, faithful. We got to have faith. Can't use reasoning too much. What did Satan use on Eve?
Temptation.
Doubt, temptation, even reasoning. He was making her think. Got this gorgeous fruit on this gorgeous tree. It was forbidden, but he said, and she said, it's even forbidden to the point if we eat it, we're going to die. And what did he say? Thou shalt not surely die. Yes.
He played on her misunderstanding of what God said.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. But and her misunderstanding of God, what God said, made it enabled him to go in there and blame something, do what he did, and it worked. So he tries it again on Peter here. You notice that? Come on, Peter. There's no way you can walk on water. And you shouldn't trust anyone saying that they can calm a storm. Come on. And the real scary part is that this enemy of ours can still do this today. Sometimes it's hard for us to see spiritual truth because we exist in pretty much a totally material world, don't we? Einstein told us that energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. E equals mc squared. This essentially eliminates any kind of spiritual world. He said it's all about matter, everything, the whole universe, time, and energy. But we know there's more. And we also know without faith, it's impossible to do what? possible to please Him? And that's something we need to keep in mind all the time. Okay, moving on now, let's check out Matthew 14, verses 34 to 36, where we see Jesus heal those in remote areas. When they crossed over, they came to a land at Gennesaret. I guess I pronounced that okay. And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent word to all that surrounding district and brought to him all who were sick. And they implored him that they might just touch the fringe of his cloak. And as many as touched it were cured. Okay, there's two really remarkable things about this brief passage. Number one, that Jesus would go to this real small, remote area, and it's actually on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. One who could do miracles and spoke from God, traveled to this little backwater place to minister to probably the least important people as far as the eyes of men go. And then, number two, the other remarkable thing was how he ministered to them. They brought all who were sick, and these were cured without a word or a long profession of faith. They simply touched his cloak and were completely healed. So what do we see here? Well, we see the king showed his concern for all those in the kingdom and demonstrated the fact that his power was available to all who came to him. No matter how poor or where they lived, all had access to the king. No matter how poor or how we live, we have access to the king. We can't ever forget that. Then there's another lesson for us, that we should be concerned for all those needing what we offer, no matter where they're from, and never make them have to pass any kind of inspection. And then we move on to chapter 15 now, and we're going to check out Jesus lifting a heavy burden. Yes, sir.
Also, if you're doing good, the word spreads.
Did y'all hear that? He said, if you're doing good, the word spreads.
Because I'm sure, the people recognized him, but he hadn't been up there doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But they still knew that
They still knew about him. That's a good point.
he could take care of it.
The word spreads. It gets out. When there's a person that does good, it gets out. When there's a congregation that's doing good, what happens? It gets out. Next thing you know, everybody knows. Now, Jesus ends up now lifting a heavy burden. We got to remember, y'all, that Jewish life, especially for common people, wasn't easy in Jesus' day. Their tiny little nation was under the imperial thumb of the pagan Roman Empire. They had dangerous regional enemies to the north and to the south. Their own political leaders were cruel and murderous. And to make matters worse, their religious leaders had so complicated their religion, it became nearly impossible to practice it with a clear conscience. So what's a very effective way to keep this from happening in the kingdom today? Simple. Very good. Exactly. Stick with and run the kingdom. Stick with and run your church with the Word. Just the Word. One of their practices they did, man-made practices, was the issue of being clean or unclean for the purposes of worship. The law of Moses had certain prescriptions about purification rites to be performed if one had a disease or one had touched a dead animal or a person. This usually involved a cleansing or a quarantine of some kind, followed by an offering at the temple to signal that a person was ready to re-enter the social and religious life of the community. But to these laws, Jewish teachers had added all kinds of conditions and ceremonies. One of these was the meticulous washing of hands and dishes required even if a person had touched any object that may have been touched by a non-Jew. Now this was beyond what God had intended and made the common man's life very complicated in his effort to serve the Lord. Rules, rules, rules. Regulations, regulations, regulations. This is the point Jesus addresses in chapter 15, 1-9, which tells us, "Then some Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, 'Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? They do not wash their hands when they eat bread.' And he answered and said to them, 'Why do you yourselves transgress the commandment of God for the sake of tradition? For God said, honor your father and mother, and he who speaks evil of father and mother is to be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father and mother, whatever I have that would help you has been given to God, he is not to honor his father or mother. And by this you invalidated the word of God for the sake of your traditions. You hypocrites, rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me, but in vain do they worship me, teaching as disciples the precepts of man.'" Okay, in this passage, Jesus reveals a double standard that Jewish leaders lived in their own lives. What they did was create a whole bunch of burdensome laws without God's consent. They twisted God's legitimate commands in order to suit themselves. As an example, they had pledged to the temple money that would normally be used to help old parents, which was a legitimate duty of the children. And by pledging this money, they would, in effect, freeze assets. Then, once the parents died, they'd reclaim this pledge from the temple for their personal use. See how they could do things? See how you can do it? We can see that it's pretty common, and it has been all throughout history, for one to shuffle around a little bit here and there and then end up getting rich from it, can't we? Ever been to Washington, D.C.? Ever been a television preacher? I saw a video of some of these televangelist homes in Houston, Texas. You wouldn't believe what they live in. But Jesus reveals this hypocrisy, and in doing so, stripped the people of the fake moral authority they used to cheat their own people. Matthew 15, 10 through 20 goes on to tell us, after Jesus called the crowd, he said to them, "Hear and understand. It's not what enters the mouth that defiles a man, but what proceeds out of the mouth. This defiles a man." Then the disciples came and said to him, "Do you know the Pharisees were offended when they heard this statement?" But he answered and said, "Every plant which my heavenly Father did not plant shall be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind guides of the blind. And if a blind man guides a blind man, both will fall into a pit." Jesus said to him, "Explain this parable." Peter said to him, "Explain the parable to us." Jesus said, "Are you still lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand that everything that goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is eliminated? But the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man. For out of the heart came evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witnesses, slanders. These are things which defile the man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile the man." So here we have simply a continuation of the process of lifting heavy burdens off the people. Jesus explains that we can become impure defiled, not worthy for worship, by what comes from our hearts, out of our mouths, not by what goes into our stomachs. He explains that it's our words, thoughts, and evil intentions that make us unworthy, not what we eat. Okay? Of course, the disciples realized the trouble this was going to cause with the Pharisees, who oversaw and taught extensively on the subject of these food laws. Why? They were doing well. And here's Jesus essentially abolishing these laws for those in his kingdom. And in this, he's the one who sees the truth, but they are simply blind. He's actually at this point becoming a leader. Even though his acts and teaching goes against the grain, he makes his followers choose which leader they'll follow, which way that they'll go. And once again, we see Peter being the one who needs and seeks clarification on this matter. Jesus explains why food itself can't really contaminate the soul. Sin does that, not food. And a heavy burden gets lifted off the people here and even now with us. Because this burden's lifted when we are in the kingdom. But being saved relieves one burden but can add another. The horrible burden of persecution that can come from those who believe and follow Jesus as Lord. Okay, we're almost out of time, so we're going to move on to Matthew 15, verses 21 next time and check out kindness towards the Gentiles. So if you want to, go ahead and read chapter 15, and then once we finish all that, we're going to go over and start talking about who is the king. So if you can, go ahead and read chapters 16 and 17, if you want to next week. 15, 16, and 17. Yes, sir.
When I was in the 6th grade, we studied this parable in Bible class. And Monday, when I was working in the yard, I came in and I was pretty dirty. And Mom said, "You better wash up." I pulled this verse out and had to read it.
I bet that impressed her.
She said, "It will not defile your soul, but it will not take it to wash your hands."
I think our mothers may have been somewhat alike. Oh, that was funny. Appreciate you. Okay. Any more questions or before we shut her down for today? All right. I appreciate all of you.